A close Dharma friend. Great. A close Dharma friend and a teacher of mine. He's fine, but he had surgery last week, so I've been thinking about him a lot. And um, he always started his Dharma talks in the same way, so I'm going to do the same thing, just because I'm really feeling connected to him right now. First, he would thank his teachers, so thank you to them, and then he would always say, "My talk is just to encourage you in your practice." So it's the entire function of what we're up to here. The topic that we're taking up for tonight is the paramis, the perfections. It's this list of 10 practices or 10 qualities that just bring a lot of beauty to life, a lot of beauty. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, the well-known translator and writer, he introduces them this way. He says the 10 perfections or paramis, they're the Buddhist teachings that are probably the most useful for bringing the path of awakening into everyday life. I hear that and my ears perk up. Because one of the questions I encounter more often than probably any other is, how do I bring the teaching into my life? How do I take my practice off the cushion? So I saw this and highlighted it immediately. He goes on, he says, there are a list of qualities that you can develop in any situation. As you're working with your family, at home, office, when you're driving, and as you're meditating. And these qualities are these. You don't have to remember all these right now. I'm going to highlight the important ones as we go. But the 10 are generosity or giving. 2 is virtue or ethical conduct. 3, renunciation. 4, discernment or wisdom. 5, persistence or energy. 6 is patience, something my mom has been counseling me in since I was a small person. 7th is honesty or truthfulness. 8 is determination or resolve. 9 is goodwill or loving kindness. And 10 is equanimity. It's quite a list, isn't it? So Thanissaro explains that parami, the word parami is related to the word paramam, which means something of foremost importance. And the point he's trying to make there is that we can prioritize these 10 practices to excellent result in our lives. So I first encountered these when I was living and practicing at a Burmese Vipassana center in the US. And I heard this teaching for the first time, which was, in order for the practice to ripen into awakening, in order for there to be awakening, in order to realize the freedom that I was seeking, all of these paramis had to be sufficiently developed. So that got my attention. And I also thought, I thought this was all about concentration. Or I thought this was just about mindfulness. The secret is mindfulness. Mindfulness generates other wholesome qualities. But my reflection at the time was like, wow, this is big. This is a list of virtues that applies when I'm not only sitting on the cushion. And what it opened up for me was the opportunity that I could practice anytime during the day, in any situation, and that actually I was nourishing my meditation practice when I did that. Pretty great. So the plan for the night is to focus on some teachings that I've really been diving into out of this particular text. It's a really old commentary, but when I recognize the fact that people have been trying to reckon with the Buddhist teaching for just hundreds of years, I find it really helpful to have a specific reference point, you know? So the teacher of this text, his name is Acharya Dhammapala, kind of like Dhammapada, but with an L instead of a D. And he's one of these authors that did the really hard work of reflecting on his tradition and responsibly and skillfully bringing it into relationship with his own time. But the time that he wrote isn't exactly clear. Closest I could find was maybe 7th century. But in a pretty short text, he opens up literally hundreds of different ways to practice these 10 paramis. And Gil did a nice thing of extracting some of the most useful bits, and there's like a 2 or 3 page adaptation on insightmeditation.org. So, of course, in the Theravada tradition, we have this, maybe from the oldest I've seen this so far is Mahasi, but I haven't looked back farther, is this idea of the paramis need to be sufficiently ripe for there to be awakening. And Dhammapala is teaching in relationship to this, that we fully mature the paramis, and that issues in Buddhahood. Maybe that's just a footnote. But we can say they issue in beautiful things, beautiful states, beautiful ways of being that are useful and heartful, compassionate and wise. So let's get into this a bit. So the paramis, they're these noble qualities, the giving and the rest, that are always accompanied by 2 things in Dhammapala's teaching, always accompanied by compassion and always accompanied by skillful means. And when they're fully mature, they're free of all this extra craving, selfing, clinging to views. Something I find useful when I consider these 10 paramis, 10 perfections, is that they're both practices and virtues. They're both causes and effects. So we practice giving in order to grow in the virtue of generosity. We practice ethical conduct in order to become virtuous. You see the connection there? We can practice a certain activity to support the growth of a virtue. And one of the ancient images for the practice of the paramis is that each one is kind of like a bucket that fills drip, 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 slowly over time. And when I was reflecting on what I was learning, an interesting thing happened to this image just in my meditation and imagination. And it was that the 10 buckets, they're all so close to one another that when one fills up, it sort of spills out into the others. And what this does for me is it calls forward the fact that one beautiful quality brings other beautiful qualities along. So we cultivate mindfulness, and all this beauty of our heart comes forward. Or we cultivate patience, and think of all the good that comes forward there. So to get a feeling for skillful means, maybe you can think of someone in your life who is pretty wise. One of these people that folks often go to for advice. Maybe you can think of one. In my experience with these sort of folks, whether what they say is really simple or what they say is unexpected, they always seem to be really well attuned to exactly what the moment needs. They're skilled in the means of doing good in the world. That's skillful means. Often I hear advice from such folks, and I have the thought, oh, of course, that seems so obvious now that you said it. It's part of the beauty, I think. But I'd like to say these folks they're not just skilled in means, but to call in compassion, I have this phrase, they're skilled in care. They're skilled in care. So compassion, skillful means, and then a third quality accompanying all of the perfections that supports all of the perfections is, in Dhammapala's teaching, a sense of aspiration. And he's particularly pointing to not only the aspiration for awakening, the aspiration for freedom, but the aspiration to do well for others, to do good for others, to benefit them. So there's a pretty straightforward method that applies to all 10. And that is, of course, knowing that we can practice a practice in order to bring about a virtue. But the basic method that Dhammapala puts forward for reflecting on these teachings or on these qualities is it's straight out of the book of Wise Effort. It's reflect upon, contemplate, and really take a serious look at the drawbacks of each quality's opposite. And then also look at the benefits of that quality instead. This is encapsulated nicely in the Dhammapada, verse 183 in Gill's translation, doing no evil, engaging in what's skillful, and purifying one's mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. It's right in line with that. And we'll get into some specifics as we get into the 10 different practices. Yeah, so let's you know, in a talk like this one, I won't be able to give you all the hundreds of Dhammapala's specifics, but I've hand selected a few and given some interpretation of those that hopefully is applicable in our Nevada City, San Francisco lives. So the first related to this perfection of generosity, this perfection of giving, Dhammapala has a really amazing skill at reframing the situation. His reflection is that the drawback of the opposite of giving is to get really intimate with the fact that having stuff and being stressed about it causes us a lot of worry. That's his doorway in. And then the virtue, you can think of a person that you can give your things to as like your best friend. He literally says, reflect on them as your best friend. They're your companion who's helping you remove these belongings from the world. I get it. I have a sense of a little bit of playfulness with that, but he sets a really interesting teaching together in getting into the joy of giving and reflecting on how if the person is dear to us, neutral to us, or hostile to us, if they ask us for something, they're giving us a gift. In any of those three cases, I saw this and I raised an eyebrow. But I think he's right after I reflect on it. So he's saying when a dear person asks us for something, gives us an opportunity for giving, it's easy to tap into the fact that oh, this dear person is asking something of me. I can give that to them. The indifferent person, the reflection is, oh, wonderful. This is what makes friends out of people. This person who's neutral in my life is going to be a dear one by virtue of this gift. And then if a hostile person asks you for a gift, it's a similar thing. Oh, this is how this tough relationship will turn, is by virtue of this gift. So I think it's pretty radical to frame all possible people as doing us or giving us an opportunity to develop the practice of giving and reflecting on it in that way. He does something a little bit different with sila, with ethical conduct, with virtue. And mainly the thing that impressed me about this was the power of metaphor. He uses metaphor after metaphor after metaphor to just describe the sheer power of virtuous conduct. I think if I were to boil down what came out of this study of Dhammapala's teaching, it's compassion, skillful means, and virtuous conduct. And he has all of these beautiful metaphors to motivate us to take up the precepts or take up the 10 skillful actions. Things like water can't cool the fires of hatred, but virtuous behavior can. Or like sila is a fragrance that pervades in all directions. He even compares it to a spell, a magic spell. Virtue is like a magic spell, or a staircase ascending to the heavens, or a highway leading to the great city of Nibbana, of liberation. So the benefit that he puts forward for practicing one of them, for practicing sila, is it protects us. It protects us and it protects others. It protects us from reproach by wise beings. But there's I don't know if you can tap into this in your own memory. Those times when you're really in alignment with your ethical sense, maybe living in integrity is a way to say this. And there's a way that brings forward so much confidence and security, almost regardless of circumstance. Something I want to highlight here is that the expectation is not that we are without our foibles. Norman Fisher calls them our little Buddha foibles. The practice of the perfections does not demand that we are perfect. It demands that we're honest, mostly with ourselves and with others. But it acknowledges completely this process that involves recognizing that something's gone astray in our conduct, and then making amends if that's skillful. And in that way, coming back into integrity with the community. Just the way that in the ancient monastic community, they would do the recitation of their community commitments, the precepts, with the cycle of the moon. And there was a time there to make amends and come back into alignment with the community. The Buddha Dharma acknowledges that we're perfectly imperfect people. So some thoughts on sila. Going to have to get selective with some of the other qualities. So I want to tell you some stories, mostly to sort of invoke or evoke how the paramis can live in our life. I think stories help illustrate just that. And there's this ancient story about there's a monastic practicing alone in the woods in the time of the Buddha, very ardent, doing walking meditation until his feet hurt, and he's frustrated because he's not free, and he's thinking about giving up the training. This may be a familiar story to you. It's in the Sona Sutta. Buddha realizes this, goes to the monastic, has a discussion with him, and he asks Sona, in your lay life, did you play this stringed instrument? We'll say the lute. Yes, I did. When the strings were too loose, would it tune and play? No, it wouldn't. And when the strings were too tight, would it tune and play? No, it wouldn't. But when the strings were neither too loose nor too tight, would it tune and play? Yes, of course. And the Buddha says, just so, with our energy, when working with our persistence, we learn to tune to what's appropriate for the moment, for the activity at hand. And this is one of the illustrations, I think, of the interplay between energy and our patience. The way that impatience can drive us forward in almost a kind of compulsive way. They can sort of like tune up our E string just way too tight. So it's one of the skills of working with these paramis, to learn how to tune your string of energy and patience. One of the other stories that I want to tell has to do with renunciation and wisdom. And this is a personal story about um, a moment that was maybe one of the purest moments of renunciation that I can imagine or that I can remember in my life. And that was when I was diagnosed with diabetes when I was like 29, late onset, totally surprised. No one really knows why. But I remember right after I would go to the grocery store and I would just pine for sweets. I would like walk down the ice cream aisle and wish, just really, really wanted. Um, that wasn't my only input. I was also getting very regular data about what was going on in my body and sugar and how that affected my body. And then I was getting some very clear messages about the consequences if this wasn't controlled, you know. If I ate a bunch of ice cream and my blood sugar goes through the roof and that's consistent, I start to, you know, do some damage to the body. So I was motivated. And what was interesting is with those two forms of input, very shortly, maybe within a month, the craving totally dropped off, where I could walk through the grocery, through the ice cream aisle. It didn't even register as food. Didn't even come into my mind as like, oh, this is a food item and I want it. It just totally fell off. And this illustrates how I think a true, complete, and balanced renunciation doesn't come through sheer force, but it comes through the dawning of wisdom. It's like we're staying close to the drawbacks of such and such an activity. When the mind and the heart are ready to let go, they'll let go. But true renunciation that lasts isn't such a demand. One more that I want to pick out is resolve, adhitthana. And this reminds me of actually when I was living in that Burmese Vipassana center, uh, I and others, I met a bunch of people who were very intensely resolved on awakening. We were super inspired. We were just white hot, you know. It's many, many years ago. I kind of look back fondly on that. And there was one person I met, and she said to me when we were doing these sort of sittings of strong determination, she said, "It doesn't matter if I will die. I am not going to move a muscle." And it was like, wow, that is intense. That's intense. And Dhammapala, when he's talking about resolve, he does sort of move into the heroic side. But very quickly, he points out that resolve is perfected by loving kindness. That there's a heartfulness that comes next in the list that pairs with our earnest, wholehearted wish for freedom for ourselves and others. It's tempered and beautified and purified by heart. And so, along with like this heroic, sometimes intense impulse, I think it's good to remember that not on the list of paramis, definitely for me, one of the supporting conditions is humor, having a sense of humor, to balance all of this seriousness. I think it's wonderful to be serious about practice. But there's this story about Suzuki Roshi, that the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, that I think illustrates this balance. This is told by Blanche Hartman. So it was a few years, the first few years of Tassajara, maybe the first three, late 60s, 70, 71, something like that. Blanche says, after a wedding at Tassajara, there was a celebration with a band. Tassajara is the Zen monastery in the mountains. So one priest was playing on the keyboard. Another was playing guitar and singing, and someone else was on the drums. And Suzuki Roshi, parentheses, Zen teacher, was sitting on the corner of the platform playing a kazoo. This is a person who took deadly serious his commitment to the benefit of beings through practice, but he did not take himself too seriously. He was okay playing a kazoo at a wedding. I think that's wonderful. So strong determination and a little bit of humor. I think these go together. Let's see. Maybe one last specific comment about a parami, and then we'll zoom back out a bit. Just a clarification about equanimity, balance of mind, equipoise. One of the questions I sometimes encounter is how is it possible to keep a balanced mind while loving people? I don't want to offer a simple answer to this. I think that's well worth a lot of study and reflection and practice. And in my experience, it's one of these things where when equanimity, there's like a turn, there's a certain maturing that happens with equanimity where it becomes obvious that it does not have anything to do with heartlessness, that we stay really intimate and close, but we have clear vision. And something about the clinging mechanism starts to decondition, so that there's this balance of mind right in the midst of everything. So I think this is pointed to in one of the alternate Pali words for equanimity, means standing in the middle of all this, right here in the middle. So that was a very quick breeze through some of the paramis, and maybe you heard something that might be useful or sparked an idea about how practice off the cushion can move forward for you, or stay right where it is. But somehow where maybe something in your life that practice doesn't touch maybe can be included. One parami supports all of the others. One wholesome quality brings all the others along. So you can approach this from any number of ways. Very often they're taught in kind of order. You begin with giving and move on and on and on. Andrea Fela took the line of whichever one is calling, whichever one sparks your curiosity, go for that. And then go from there. But generosity, virtue, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, resolve, metta, loving kindness, equanimity. Yeah, what can those not touch? Well, thank you for reflecting on the paramis with me for a bit. I kind of feel like that talk was the beginning of a conversation, and I'm interested in what is on your hearts and minds.
Great.
I saw Jen and then Molly, I think.
Kodo, thank you. I just wanted to say I'm really intrigued with your use of the word resolve.
Yeah.
That's not, it's just like, it just feels like a new friend of a word.
Nice.
Yeah. So I just want to say that and recognize that I'm gonna sort of play with that as a new vocabulary word. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. If I'm not mistaken, I think it comes through Thanissaro Bhikkhu. I think that's how he translates aditana.
Really,
glad that
yeah,
landed.
yeah, really intriguing. Thank you.
You're welcome. Molly.
Hi. I just I I I did write down all the virtue or the 10 paramis that you said.
Yeah,
And when I'm looking at the list, I have an idea of like I have enough of a grain of understanding to get started on them.
nice.
Except except for the second one you said. You said virtue, and that one is just too broad for me to understand. Like, how would you get started on that? They're
Right.
all virtues.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. Great question. Thank you for bringing it up. There are two very specific things that are pointed to. One, and they're totally easy to find resources about and like pick up. One is the five precepts. So that's listed. And the other is something called the 10 skillful actions. If you look up either one of those, that can give you something actionable and quick. But the five precepts, often we take them at the beginning of retreats. And if you go visit practice centers or monasteries, um, often you'll hear about them often. But they're things like uh, uh, they're like rules of training in order to develop our mind and heart in terms of letting go and wise living with other beings. So many of them sound familiar, and you're probably already doing like undertaking the training not to kill, or take what isn't given, or to harm with our sexuality, or to refrain from false speech as a training, or to not intoxicate. All of these as a training. Those are the five precepts paraphrased. But the 10 skillful actions have some other really juicy stuff about speech. Um,
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Great.
Kodo, I have a question. It's Marcia, even though it's coming through another tile there of Robin's.
Sure.
I wanted to hear a little bit about patience. To me,
Hmm.
that's the one that always is the most challenging in a
Yeah,
way to work with. And I was wondering if there was any little tidbit that you had about patience that you could share.
sure, sure. Is it okay if I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Anything in particular that is what is the condition for the arising of impatience?
Well, in relationship, often, uh, it can happen with speech where
Uh-huh.
there's the urge to interrupt or to, jump into the conversation before it's finished or listen fully. My mind goes right into impatience.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah. I can relate the strength of the impulse, whether it's to like jump into the conversation or something else going on in relationship, but the impulse is really strong. And in my sense of the way Dhammapala is going at it here, some of the approach would be to get really close to that impulse and have a really good look at how it's helping you and how it's causing you to stumble or harming others. So getting really clear about both of those things. It's the approach of sort of letting mindfulness and wisdom do some of the work, where we don't have to have the right answer about what the next step in the practice is going to be. If we get really, really close to where the suffering is happening and let the wisdom work.
That's great.
The maybe one other thing is to emphasize this part about That's sort of like the skillful means side. Then there's the compassion side, which is can be directed in any number of ways. But for me, if I'm with another and I'm tuned in, I'm tuned into through my heart, sort of like feeling for what's beneficial for this other being that I'm with, that brings in a very different orientation and allows for some more space and some more patience to be there. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you for the question. I started to think of the 10 paramis as like parenting practice. So I'm not a dad, but I imagine when a parent goes through the process of parenting well, these are like the 10 things that get developed. If it goes well. I mean, not everyone has a great experience with child rearing, but it demands a lot in terms of patience. Molly, yeah.
Hi again. I
Hi.
just wanted to thank you for repeatedly highlighting how not engaging in the virtue helps us in some way. Like, not that it's helpful, but that there's a balance and there's two sides to things, and we're not just, there is some kind of a gain of sorts, and it's hard to combat and change the habits unless you're ready to face like what you're getting out of that action or that
Mhm.
behavior. And I just really appreciate that you keep reminding me of that. So thanks.
You're very welcome. I'm appreciative of this very old text. Isn't that amazing how it's still relevant? How did they know? Yeah, I'm hearing some good reflections. Any we can turn up the heat a little bit and say anything that did not sit well with you that you want to share with the group, or anything you want to say. I don't know about this, Kodo. Yeah,
Uh,
Robin.
so not turning up the heat, but going back to what you were talking about, one of the first things you had mentioned is thinking about the virtue and then the opposite quality and the repercussions of that. And like the first thing that came to mind was I think, what was it, goodwill?
Yeah.
It's like, whatever,
Virtue?
but not virtue, but the like kind of like loving kindness. And the opposite, I was thinking of ill will, which we on our Tuesday nights we're going over the 5 hindrances.
Nice.
And it's really easy to feel ill will towards a something or someone. It can come up naturally. But when you think about it as the opposite of loving kindness, like to me, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be not lovingly kind to someone. And so it
Mhm.
kind of like flips it on its head a little bit, where it's like, oh, this person's so annoying. But then you're like, oh, but I want to practice loving kindness. And if I'm doing the opposite, I don't know why that thinking of it that way makes it sound, crueler or whatever. But like for me, that
Mhm.
just really, so I was like, oh, yeah, if you really think about, these virtues could be hard, but if you think about the opposites and the effects of them, it makes it easier to be like, no, I really want to do that, or vice
N-
versa.
Nice, nice. So something about pairing them with their opposites you find motivating.
Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
I mean, especially it's like, oh, we all want to have loving kindness towards people, but when we think about how easy it is to feel frustration or ill will, impatience, whatever, um, and then, but then you flip it back and you're like, oh, wait, but loving kindness is easy, in a way. Like I have compassion for this person. So
Yeah, you get I mean, you get a little you get a little, you get a notification from your
yeah.
internal iPhone, and you have a moment of choice
Yeah.
to go in the direction of loving kindness. Well, it looks like I have my own hand up. How funny is that? Oh, the hand up thing distracted me from the second thought I was going to share. Oh, I remember now. Maybe, yeah. If something that's if it's not explicit in this old text, it's certainly understood. If all of these paramis were perfectly mature in us, we would be Buddhas. And so I think from here until either arhatship or here until Buddhahood, we're gonna have some mix of these qualities and their opposites going on. And so how do we handle that compassionately and wisely and keep moving in a wholesome direction? Yeah, to me it's pretty honest. I think Molly, and then we'll probably need to wrap up, I think.
Thanks. This is not really related to what you spoke about, except that I'm really new to like the Buddha practices specifically. Not the ideas per se, but anyway, what has come to my attention is that Buddha was a person that lived. And is there a story that Buddha has a story? Where can I read a simplified but clear version of Buddha's story?
Nice. This is great. Um, there are one of the fascinating things about the development of Buddhism over time. I'm going to give you a straight answer, but I'm going to qualify it first. And that is, over the centuries, there have been so many different tellings of the Buddha story. And it's almost like each tradition has their own way of doing it. So maybe just know that when you read the first one, there are a bunch of them out there. One you could probably look at tonight would be on Wikipedia. No kidding.
Okay.
And then one that's very practice based and sort of like integrates practices with the story of the life of the Buddha. There's a writer named Analayo, Bhikkhu Analayo, Analayo, and he wrote something called A Meditator's Life of the Buddha.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
sure. Enjoy Buddha stories. Where do we go now? I think it's announcement time, or
Kodo, what about Herman Hesse's Siddhartha?
That's not.
oh, where did the question come from?
Hi, it's Marie.
Hey, Marie.
Hi.
I love that book. I don't think that yeah, it's not a bio. It's sort of like an inspired contemplative novel that pulls some elements from the Buddha's story, but yeah, I wouldn't consider it a bio. Maybe like biofiction,
Mhm.
something like that. I was really inspired. I love that book.
So Kodo, if you could just lead us in a metta, and then Jen will do the announcements right after.
Great. Thanks
you.
for helping to orient me.
Yeah.
Let me get my bell ready. Excuse me. Oh, moment of stillness. Tonight we've come together to meditate together, share in the Dharma together. May all the benefit of this practice deeply nourish us and bring some benefit into this world. Let's turn our hearts to a goodwill. First to ourselves. May I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be safe and protected. And may I live with ease. And to share that kindness now in all directions to all beings. May all beings everywhere be happy. May all beings everywhere be safe and protected. May all beings be healthy. And may all beings know the ease of liberation.